So we're moving along to our next presentation here this afternoon. We have Technology Can't Solve Your Farm Transition. Peter Manness is a business advisor in MNP's Farm Management Consulting Group, working throughout Manitoba. Peter delivers management, consulting, services, and helps implement solutions on a wide range of issues for primary agriculture producers, agriculture industry organizations, and producer groups, including Hutterite colonies. With over 20 years of industry experience, Peter has firsthand knowledge of agriculture production. He understands the challenges the agriculture sector faces today and can quickly identify opportunities. Peter was designated a professional agrologist, PH in Ag, in 2004 after completing a Bachelor of Science in Agribusiness at the University of Manitoba. Peter grew up on a mixed farm near Dormain, Manitoba. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. I have some help here too, so we'll get some logistics out of the way first. Okay, no, that's okay. Yeah, I'll see. It's bright down here. So thanks for having us. I've got some help here today just to talk about farm transition. The title that I have, always dream up a catchy title, which is Technology Can't Solve Your Farm Transition. And so I've got Blair Guthels and Patsy Hewitt here as well to talk about farm transition. So Patsy and I work at MNP, and then Blair is a client of ours that I think he volunteered. It's debatable. To come and just kind of talk about the experience through transition. Obviously, it's nice to hear from advisors, but it's also important, I think, to hear from people that are working through it. So, with that, we'll get started. I think. Oh, it's doing funny things on the screen. That's okay. So for any of you that have been involved in the agriculture sector, we're going to talk about things and about technology and about how our farms have adapted over the last, for a lot of us that have family history here in Manitoba, have adopted over the last kind of 120 years and really come a long way. And we certainly know how technology has changed agriculture. And I would say that I think we all can agree that it's probably for the better. I do not work as labor intensively as my dad did, and my dad did not work as laborly intensive as my grandfather did. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a change that's going on. I found out yesterday that Ag Days is turning 50 years old next year, so I went back to 1977 to think about what Ag Days might have looked like. And 1977 was a pretty big deal for those of you that are international fans, because it was the release of the axial flow. So if maybe we'd been here 49 years ago, we'd all be down. I hear an echo. Do you hear an echo? Okay. We would all be maybe down in the Manitoba room looking around at the axial flow and how that changed agriculture. I cheated a little bit because the Borgo air seeder didn't actually come out until 1980. And then the biggest tractor you could buy in 1977 was that fancy looking 8630. If we fast forward to today, we all know what's out there, what's down in the equipment rooms, and how those things have changed significantly in that time frame. Whether it's the new 785 quad track or the Borgo Paralink, that Blair and I were actually talking about here over lunch, or the X9. So significant changes that we've seen in technology and how it's made our farms more efficient. And if I kind of go along with the slides that Darren had talking about kind of some of the changes that we've seen, is that if you look at the overall productivity of farms in Manitoba, is that we can see that play out. And this is only 25 years of data, going back to 2000, but we can see that the average yield for wheat in Manitoba has gone up from under 40 bushels an acre in 2020 to well over 65 bushels an acre in 2024. And then the same with canola, not to the same extent, but we've continued to see an increase in yield trend over that time. And so we know, I don't have to tell you anything that you don't already know, that we know that technology is making a difference in agriculture and production. But when it comes to farm transition and the work that we do with clients, is that we find that it's obviously there's nothing in technology that can fix the things that we need to do to make transition successful. So where ag is going to go next, I don't know. I think we all can guess. I don't know if everybody saw that unmanned drone, or not the unmanned, the manned drone that was over in the MNP hall. I don't know if that's where ag is going next, but certainly a lot of technology out there that's going to continue to advance the business that we're in. But when we continually work with families in farm transition, what we find is that it comes back to the basics of communication and family dynamics, and trying to help to work through those situations. And so there's a continuous improvement plan, and I kind of adapted this one for transition, which talks about the importance of communication, to building a plan, to trying to execute whatever that is, evaluating whether it's right, wrong, or other, whether it's worked, and then continuing that process. And I think that what we sometimes see with farm families is that either get stuck in those first two phases, not really sure how it's going to work, and that kind of holds up the planning. The communication and the planning holds up the execution, because we're trying to get it perfect on the first try. And I think that there's some value in the value in continuing to work through that process, and then refining it as it comes out. When we talk about farm transition, I shouldn't have sat the furthest away from the monitor. There really are 6 major pieces that fit into that when we talk with families. And really all of them play an important part. And working at MNP, working as an accounting firm, we always want to talk about tax, and farmers want to talk about tax and how not to pay it, and how, what strategies they have. But tax is really only one small part of a successful farm transition. And there's the other pieces that go into that as well: financial planning, risk management, farm management, family governance, and then estate planning. And all those pieces kind of go together. At the core of farm transition is what I call this transition equation, which isn't really that complicated. It's thinking about what you own, and then dividing it into 3 buckets. What you're going to need from a retirement perspective, what you're going to, any gift that you might give to your non-farming kids, and then whatever is left over then becomes the gift to the farming child. Where it gets complicated is trying to decide how those things are going to get divided. And as we just heard Darren talk about the changes that we've seen in farm economics, is that it's the challenge of farm profitability. And we know that we've come through some times where profitability has been really good, but we also know that that there's challenges ahead, and how do we balance that and the risk that goes with that farming business, and then the large value of assets that are with the farm. So some of the things that we use when we talk about farm transition is talking about talking about the three-circle model. And as simple as this is, it's kind of tried and tested, is really thinking about your farm family in three different buckets. And oftentimes we think about it all as one, is that it's a farm and a family and it's all in one piece, but there are different and distinct pieces. So we see the three large circles within there, the family, the ownership, and the business. But in reality, there's four smaller circles within there where we see overlap, where we see family members that maybe are involved in the business but aren't owners, or we see people that that maybe still have ownership in the business, but they aren't actively ownership of the farm and of farm value, but they aren't actively in the business. And so just thinking about how people move throughout those circles, and then what the roles and expectations are that go with that. On top of that, then we also have then people that are just working their way through different life cycles of their business, and how those individual pieces can have this layer that's over top of it. So in a way, it's not a two-dimensional model, but it's actually a three-dimensional model, where we've got people that are kind of working through the different layers. We might have a young family that's starting up, or what we often see when we get into the ownership is this idea about siblings that are in a partnership, and then ultimately this great big discussion about what happens if cousins are going to farm together, and this idea of a cousin consortium. So what I will go and ask clients about is really these four questions as it relates to the circles. And with this, then we're going to go over and going to get some insight from Patsy and Blair. But thinking about what circle that you want to be in, where you want to fit within those circles, what do you get by being there? I think we often think about, okay, well, if I'm going to be there, there's some things that I get in return for my contribution. But the reality is, to be entrepreneurial, to be in a family business, is there are also things that you need to give up. And I think that that's an important piece to think about as well, is what are you prepared to give up in order to do that? And then finally is that what do you expect from others? So if you want to participate in a certain area of the business, what are you expecting from your parents? What are you expecting from your siblings? Maybe it's your aunt or your aunt and uncle, depending on kind of the structure of your farm. And think about that, and then how you kind of want to work your way, and the roles and responsibilities that you want to have within your farm family business. So with that, we're going to get some feedback from Patsy and from Blair, and just talk a little bit about farm transition, and then Blair's going to kind of talk about his family and kind of the process that they're on. Blair, I'll start with you. I'm going to give you a bit of a chance to introduce yourself and a little bit about your farm history.
Yeah, so our farm started with my dad and my uncle. Then there was my cousin, my brother, and I was the youngest of the group. So back in '97, my dad and uncle stepped out. So we went through that phase. In 2007. My cousin, he stepped out, so we went through that. And then now this previously, my brother, he's stepped out, and I think 21 was his last crop. So now we're in the transition of our son that's coming up to, that we're farming together. So we have a kind of a little inside joke all the time that the farms went through 3 divorces, and I'm still married to the same person. So so that's where we are at today. We're working at it. I don't know if you want me to keep going.
Sure.
So the question is who's involved in the business today? So it's my son and his wife, and Bev and I. So Dale's exit plan, he actually started that with these guys 8 years ago. So he was in a tax bracket where we could figure things out prior to the last day that he left. So when he did leave, we had the value, like rightfully so, he gets what he deserves. But everything went pretty smoothly. for us to strictly just buy them out totally, no, we couldn't do that. So we're on a 10-year plan with him. He still helps us on the farm. So that's how it started. And there's a question on here, would I do anything different through this? Not really, because it has gone very well. We get along very well. And it's hard. It's hard to do. But we're lucky we all got along. And we had one goal in mind, and that's to keep the farm successful as it can be. The only thing I would do a little bit with Wade, there's a question about when Wade come into the farm. The only thing I would change a little bit, we waited for Wade to get into the farm to buy a portion of my brother's corporation. If I go back in time, I think I would have maybe got him to farm a bit on his own and not get the whole farm thrown at him, like, he's in full, both feet right away. So that'd be the only thing I would change a little bit, maybe that he could get a taste of everything on a smaller scale until everything was thrown at him.
Patsy, having been involved with a few, first of all, I've put my cell number there on the bottom, so if you've got questions, we'll have some time for questions at the end, but if you've got questions as we go and want to send me a question, I'm not guaranteeing I'll read them all. It's not like Ron Burgundy, if it's on the teleprompter, I'm going to read it, or I guess President Trump these days, but anyways. But if you've got a question, and I'll pass it along and we'll answer it. So, Patsy, having been involved in a few farms with brothers that are exiting, what do you think that made the plan with the Goethals work well?
You know what, Peter gave us the questions before, so I've had some time to reflect and think about that question, and I think there was a couple really major things that did. The one that comes to mind is the communication and the planning. As Blair said, this was 8 years ago that they started discussing it, and so I think the fact that they discussed it, planned, even if it was, a few minutes at our meeting every year or at the farm chatting about it, they kept talking about it. And I think that's part of how they kept the communication open. As Blair said, they got along really well. And something I really admired about the families as they were doing it is I think they also both wanted to see success and work together for each family. So the farming family that was continuing on, as well as Dale and his family that was exiting farming, they wanted to see their retirement be what they wanted it to be. And Dale and his wife wanted to see the farm continue with another generation. So I think those were really the key things, was that open communication, that desire for both sides to be successful, and then the planning.
I think that I was thinking about this as well, is that I'm not sure I've been in a situation where you can start, talking about it too early, right? It might not mean that you work your way through the execution of the plan, but at least it's on people's mind if you're talking about it and starting to think about it, and then maybe, as you said, right, it was kind of an 8-year plan that every year as you got a little bit closer, then you got, maybe got into a little more detail about what the important pieces were and how close it was to execute. One of the questions, Blair, that you and I had talked about was, I'd asked you if you were ready kind of when Dale was kind of ready to exit, and you had told me you weren't, but you also said that it was probably good that it had happened at that time. I don't know if you just want to make a comment about that.
Yeah, I wasn't myself, was never ready for it. But you got to respect everybody's decision. The timing was, in our benefit, the timing was when it took place. The interest rates were probably on the all-time low, and that helped out a lot. But yeah, all in all, no, that last day of combining wasn't much fun. That's how the farm was built, and we had a really good relationship.
You? Oh, okay. You. Okay. I'm probably waving it around. That's causing a problem. So, what's maybe some differences in farming with your brother versus farming with Dale versus farming with Wade now?
Oh, there's some differences. When you're farming with your brother and you grew up with him, you could do whatever you want and say whatever you want, and you, at least at the end of the day, you were going home in two different directions. But that part is definitely different. You don't, you got to handle, your son's relationship's definitely different than your brother's. But at the end of the day, we were fortunate that we all had the same goals, and that's the big thing, and that's one of the hardest things to do, because the one question that they have here is that easy to transfer. A lot of the things were easy to transfer for me to Wade, just because he's definitely more tech, he's more organized, he's, that part was awesome. You get Dale and I were probably getting fairly stale in some of that aspect as you get older, and he comes in and cleans it up pretty good for us. So, but yeah, all in all, there's definitely differences. Was it easier? Is it easier farming with your son? I almost argue that no, it's not easier, because you got to handle things different, and you get in a routine. Like when you farm with your brother for probably 40 years, it's easy, but all of a sudden you got different clientele in there, and it's your son, so, and your son's family, so you not that you have to tread on thin ice or anything, but you definitely handle things different.
Yeah. What are you talked about things that were maybe easy to transfer? What are some things that that you maybe are kind of, as you're midway through the transfer, that you see are going to be a little bit more challenging, or that are just going to require a little more deliberate attention to try and transfer some of those responsibilities?
I would say the hardest thing is when you've been farming with your brother for all them years, we always had the same goal. And goals change, and that's the hardest thing for me, is to respect. Probably Wade's goals are different than what that I was through the whole process. So that is hard. You get personal with a lot of people that you deal with, but at the end of the day, you got to let them in there and take over. And it works though.
One of the big debates or discussions in farm transition, Patsy, is this idea about when the right time is to transfer ownership or management. And I know, Blair, you talked a little bit about that, just in terms of bringing Wade in maybe a little bit differently. What's kind of your opinion on that, Patsy?
That's okay?
Yeah.
My opinion, actually, as I thought about that question, I actually think the ownership piece is more the simpler piece. To me, that's more tax related, that's more planning, okay, what structure makes sense. So I think that the management transfer piece is the biggest part, and I think that is what needs to at least start to come first. While you're doing that, you can be having discussions about ownership and letting that next generation know, that you're going to come into the farm. But you really need to make sure, both for the existing farm and the incoming generation, that they want to do this and that they understand what is involved with that. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's interesting to hear Blair's comment about his son having done some farming on his own. I think that goes in that respect as well. Like, you want them to have the opportunity, whether it's with you or doing it that way, to actually have to make negotiations, agree on land rent, do some of that. And so whether you can do that as a family, generation to generation, or they need to do a bit of that on their own, I think that's very important. So I do think the ownership piece is important, and I think you should be talking about it during that transition. But after the years of being involved in some of the transitions and discussions, my answer would be, I think that management transition or at least a part of it needs to come first.
One of the things that we did, Blair, was we had a planning meeting with your family. Patsy was there as well, where we kind of everybody talked about their goals and the the strengths and weaknesses of the farm. Did that? I guess you can tell me no because I didn't ask you beforehand. But did you find that was helpful, or was that insightful in terms of in terms of working through this transition with Wade and Hillary?
Yeah, it's helpful. It's always hard. It's always hard, that first meeting, because let's face it, when you do something that long, you get stuck in your ways. And you see different goals, and you're thinking, nah, that ain't gonna work. You can't do that. But you gotta, first communication's tough. But then from there on, if you keep at it, and we gotta be a little more, set ourselves for meetings and that more often, because a lot of times, if Wade and I maybe don't see eye to eye in some of that stuff, you just let it go, and then the next time you have your meeting, you say, well, did you think about this, or did you think about that, or and rightfully so. But our goals, like I say, when you were farming, when you were back when you were 18 farming, you had one way you wanted the farm to go, and that's straight up as much as you can to keep it, to expand it, to keep it going. My son's goals and his family, I think they're maybe don't want that graph to go up quite as quickly as what we had to do, right? So, yeah, but you understand that at these meetings, because that's kind of when it comes out.
Because it's not like you stand around the combine asking each other what your goals are. Maybe just, since we're kind of on this track, is maybe just comment too about the importance of obviously yourself and Wade and that communication, but the importance of so yourself and Bev and Wade and Hillary all trying to kind of be deliberate about meeting together as well to talk about the farm, and just kind of how you see the importance of that.
It's important, and we probably, like I say, we don't do it enough, and we got to get more manageable that we do make ourselves do it. Whether it's what we should do with grain pricing, what we should do with land rent that's coming up, or maybe you want to let this one chunk go, or maybe you want bid on this other chunk. It's that time that all comes out, and it's kind of good. Like Wade and I are together all the time, but obviously Bev and Hillary, they're not with us all the time by any means, so they get more informed on what's going on probably than maybe sometimes that Wade and I take for granted.
Patsy, from your side of the desk, as being a financial advisor and accountant for a lot of farm families, what signs would you say that you can see that maybe that the transition is going well or not going well?
I think one of the big things that I see when it's going well is especially in those meetings where we're talking about transition and planning, and I'm doing a lot less talking than the family is actually doing. That to me is a really good sign, because they're talking to each other about it, communicating. When you're sitting in a room and trying to have the conversation and it's just silence, then you know that it's probably not going very well. The other thing that I always think is a sign to me is when I start to see more and more people coming into the meeting. So with Blair, we often met, the four of us, Blair, Bev, Dale, and Pam, and then, that transition, we dealt with that. And then we never met just Blair and Bev and I. The next meeting was Blair, Bev, Wade, and Hillary. So I think having more of those people in the meeting and involved, you can really see that transition is going well. Doesn't have to go perfect, but you know that it's making steps forward. When you know it's not going well is when one person wants to start meeting with you on their own, or you don't see them coming in as a family anymore and things like that. That's a red flag. You can also see it in the numbers. I think if you see the farm continuing to grow, whether it's profitability or in size or things like that, that's a good indicator too, that things are continuing to move forward.
I think also just that telltale sign, as you mentioned, is and you would think it would be automatic, but just years and years where we talk about the next generation but never see them at the meetings.
Yes, that's one of my favorite things is when I see, not that I don't love meeting with Blair and Bev, but when you see the next generation with the family coming in, that's exciting to see that they're starting to involve them. And they don't have to be an owner to come to the meeting. I think Peter asked later what the incoming generation can do. That's a big thing, is start getting involved and learning about the business and asking the questions. So that to me is a really great indicator of it going well.
I read or was reminded recently that for most of it, it takes 4 or 5 times for us to hear something for it to sink in. So in reality, if you think about a financial statement, a meeting to review the financial health of a business, is that you probably need to be there 4 or 5 times before you even just start to grasp kind of all of the things that are going on in that and kind of be able to contribute. So if you think about that and the lead time, you know, again, back to that 8-year discussion that you kind of were talking about, the build up for Dale coming out of the farm and Wade coming in is to allow for that, just to start to pick up some of that information as you go. So I'll ask you again, Patsy, you want to kind of expand on what you think farmers should be doing now in preparation for the transition. And so you talked a little about the incoming generation. What about the outgoing generation?
For the outgoing generation, I think it's really important to start having the discussions about what you think or want your lifestyle or your life to look like as you transition out and once you're done with the farm. It's important you spend, and you know, Bev and Blair, we've spent a lot of time talking about the transition with his brother, but I think it's important to now start talking about, okay, well, what does your transition look like? What do you want out of the farm? What do you need when it's your time? Because you need a number of years to start planning about that too. And so I think it's really important to think about what that looks like for you, talk about it amongst yourselves, talk about it with us, and that way then you can then communicate it to the next generation so they also know what that plan looks like. And I think that's part of what worked well with this one as well, is that Blair and Bev knew what Dale and Pam needed or wanted as well. So I think it's important to do that. It's not easy to do. I often have people sit across the desk and ask me, well, we don't need much, or tell us what we need. But I think you have to really think about that, and it's different because it's a different part of your life, but it's important to know those things.
Blair, I'll ask you actually the same question. If you had had another farmer come to you and ask you for some advice on their transition, what would you say to them?
I'd say a couple things. I said the first thing is you can't do it overnight. Like you need to plan. And the next thing is communication. If it's family, you know, you see so much of it that does go bad, and that's just disheartening. So there's got to be give and take, and I think we are very fortunate that it went the way it has gone, and hopefully continue that with the next transaction. And I think communication is huge, and timing, like advanced timing.
So I actually have 2 questions. Are you ready? They're not on the sheet. So the first one is just about if there's a perceived gap in management ability between between the active generation and the incoming generation, is how do you how do you deal with that and kind of work through, the concern and the risk about, maybe the farm profitability declining, or how do you kind of work your way through that decision process? I'm going to answer this one myself. Do you want to comment on that? Yeah?
You comment.
I think the probably the bluntest answer is really you have to decide for the active generation. You have to decide if you're going to decide whether your son farms or not, or whether your son gets to decide whether they farm or not. And I think that probably is the core question number one, is that if you are prepared, you have to be prepared to let them make mistakes. And that comes with some financial risk that can be balanced. But ultimately, you have to decide if you're going to give them the opportunity to decide for themselves. And obviously, you can put some guideposts in place for that. But that's probably at the core. And if you're willing to let them decide, then I think then there is a process through kind of communication to talk about some concerns and maybe it's through a facilitator, some concerns, and then an action plan to try to improve and build the skills up with that incoming generation. But if you've already decided that they are not capable of running your farm business, and that happens, it's a very difficult conversation, and it happens, then your obligation is to I would say to have that discussion and be willing to be frank about that. Because the wealth isn't going away, your family is still going to have the wealth. People might not get to work out the way that they want, but if you're not going to kind of prepare to work through that process be prepared to work through that process, then it's important that you're honest as soon as possible, because the worst thing is to drag it out and I think that those are the challenges that we see, is that things get dragged out for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, and then what you find out at the end is that there was never really the opportunity that you thought was there for that incoming generation, and that's really what's unfortunate. Okay. The second question, I might end up answering this one too. These are doozies. It's way easier when they ask them in person. Is if you're in a situation where family members aren't on speaking terms, how do you, tips and strategies to kind of continue to work through things, or how would you work? I'm going to ask you this one to you, Patsy. How would you how would you work through that, or is there anything that can be done?
Yes, I do think that there is something that can be done in that situation. I think family transition is not easy. Sometimes it goes well, but it's not easy. And I think, as to what Peter was saying, sometimes it just doesn't work. So I think you have to recognize those situations and have the hard conversation. If it's a situation where two families may not be talking, they can't work through it. I have had clients where they've actually gone and they have talked to somebody that is a professional that deals with those kind of things, with family dynamics, and sometimes you do need to do that. It's like I say, it's not easy. Sometimes there's other things at play, and so I think you need to reach out to the right professional people that can help with that. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, no shame to do that. This is your family you're talking about. So I think it is in those situations, realizing when you may need to talk to somebody that can help with that. We certainly will talk with families each on their own and try and help where we can. But again, as I said, I've had situations where they actually needed to go and talk to some professional people, and it does help.
I would echo that, and I think that it comes back to, as we kind of finish this up, and back to this, this idea about kind of the communication piece, is that I think that where families really get stuck and is that they get to a point, and then that are having a challenge, they get to a point and there's some conflict and they aren't able to work their way through that. And I think at the core of it is you have to, if you have people that are actively working to sabotage each other and actively working against each other, then I think it's you've just got to, you've got to be honest about that. But if you are struggling, still are trying to think of the best interest at heart of the other family that you're involved with, even if your goals maybe don't align. Those are two completely different things, and I think you need to be honest about that. Is that if you think that the other party is actively conspiring against you, then maybe this isn't going to be the right opportunity for you to continue as you are. So, with that and finishing up, I just wanted to come back to talk about thinking about your plan and the importance of moving through these steps. So, communicating, having a plan, executing it, evaluating what you've done, and then kind of repeating this over and over again as you work through through the planning process. The reality is that I don't remember what I wrote. What did I write? It was good. Now I remember. So progress requires change. So in order for you to do something different, you have to be willing to change and do something different. But the other reality is that change requires failure. I call them moments of extreme frustration. So if you're working through your transition plan and you don't have moments of extreme frustration, then I would say that you're probably not making as much progress as you think you are. Because you're going to give up those things. You're going to give up those relationships. You're going to, as Blair talked about, you're going to talk to people that you've had long-standing relationships with, and you're going to say, no, I can't make that decision. You know what? You're going to have to call, as Blair said, you're going to have to call Wade because that's his responsibility, and I can't make that decision on my own, or I need to consult him. So simple things like that. Hard things like, making decisions to change direction or maybe to, give up land that you've been farming. Or things like that, or changing the color of equipment that you deal with because of the relationships, right? No, we're not there yet, Blair? Not yet. Your John Deere dealer is happy to hear that, Blair. So one of the things then just to think about is thinking about how you're going to measure the progress on your plan in the coming year. So as you're getting the elbow from your wife for those of you that are up here with your spouse, is think about how you're going to measure progress when you come a year from now to Ag Days, and think about that. And just to wrap up, coming back to talking about failure, is that in reality is that the only way you fail is if you don't try. And I want to bring this back to technology and ag, and talk about Jerome Beckard. Do we know who this is? Why he's important to us here today? Does anyone want to shout it out?
Said Bourgault.
He knows the answer. Did you see that? You cheated. So the father of the modern air seeder, and he does have specific ties to Bourgault, but you'll notice on the top there, because he licensed his patent to Bourgault that attached his seeder to their cultivator, and here we are today. But did you know that there's Forgo was the fourth company that he licensed that product to? There's 4 others there. Some of them I recognize. I think I remember seeing a Prasco air seeder here or there. But even for somebody that had great ideas and was smart and was an innovator and a founder in our industry, it took 3 chances of failure before he was able to link up with the right people and to be able to ultimately change the industry we're in. So with that, I just want to thank Blair and Patsy for joining me to talk about farm transition. 3 minutes. If I can see through the lights, if there's anyone brave enough that wants to ask a question. Yeah.
That is an ongoing. I have a daughter that is married into a farm, so she's farming too. So we tried it. I would happen to say, I think Patsy would probably add to this. Sometimes fair is not equal, but at the end of the day, for Bev and I, we have to, and I think Wade realizes, like, he just can't, it's not going to be everything because we don't have the resources to hand our other two daughters, you know, some kind of equity or whatever they're down the road. So that's an ongoing thing with us. We keep doing that yearly. It's not etched in stone after the 1 year, or you know, we keep going back to it because let's face it, land values change, everything changes. So, and I think Patsy probably could add to this.
Yeah, I think we have discussion very often, exactly like Blair said. It's a hard thing for parents to think about, but fair isn't always equal, and so it's really having a look at that, and then there's lots of different ways we can help with setting things up so that depending what you do want to do and you decide to do can be done in a way that is a benefit to the non-farming child and also doesn't cause issues for the child farming as well. So.
Yeah, and I think that it's not to be wishy-washy about it, but I think also is it to be, the more that you talk about it, the more deliberate you're going to be in your actions. And I would say that the families that are know it's a concern and talking about it and kind of wrestling with it on an annual basis, I guarantee that you will have a better outcome than if you just kind of bury your heads in the sand and don't really do anything about it, because there are tools that you have available to you, without going into detail because we don't have time, but there are some tools that are available to you that you can work and still be part of it. One of the things that I think is absolutely important is ask your non-farming kids about the farm, and that is always a good place to start. So tell them what you're doing and say, hey, this is the legacy that we built on our farm. What's your opinion about the farm? And 9 times out of 10 is their answer is going to be, well, it's important to us that the farm continues, and they see themselves as part of that legacy. Obviously, understanding that there's big financial disparities that may be in equity that come into that, and so, but I think that's an important piece of that conversation. It's going to help you to make those decisions.
I just want to add one thing. Like, I think what we look at a lot with with our girls that aren't in the farm is that we can't jeopardize, like if we made it equal, there's no way that Wade's going to survive if, the farm is, to survive, we go through that somewhat.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this. It was a really great presentation. Thank you very much.